Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. We are in the company of Eleanor Beardsley of National Public Radio. Also with us, Vivian Walt of Time Magazine, Franco-Syrian photojournalist Amar Abed Rabo, and France 24's very own Robert Parsons. Before the break, we were talking about how the fighting is getting worse inside of Syria. Now, the week began with the German Chancellor in Ankara, a precursor to NATO announcing patrols to crack down on people smugglers in the Aegean Sea off Greece. There, the German Chancellor weighed in on the matter of the Russians intervening on the side of the Syrian government in this fight.
In the past days, we have become not just alarmed, but appalled by the human misery that has unfolded for tens of thousands of people, caused predominantly by Russian airstrikes.
Now, Eleanor Beardsley, Angela Merkel taking heat for bending over backwards, according to critics, when she goes to Turkey and visits President Erdogan. It's a delicate balancing act for the German Chancellor.
Absolutely, and I think, for her to say something like that about the Russians, I think she's probably one of the only leaders Putin actually listens to, and she can have influence on him. She's got all the pressures on her. It's an absolute delicate balancing act, and this woman, I don't know how she's going to survive all this. Some people say she's condemned Germany with all of these migrants and
because those
key role.
Those migrants, those refugees who are at the border between Syria and Turkey, the feeling is that when that border opens, it's this way that they're coming, Vivian Walt.
Of course, and there's only one or two countries that 90% of migrants, actually refugees, want to head to. They want to go to Germany or they want to go to Sweden. You speak to any refugees, that's where they want to go. So the country clearly is having a hard time. Germany is having a very hard time imagining absorbing another 200,000 refugees or something. And clearly the system of relocating them as it was supposed to happen within the EU has really not worked at all.
How should Angela Merkel be handling Turkey?
Turkey, I felt this week that there was kind of schizophrenia of Merkel, but also of the whole European Union. Like 1 month ago, we were all telling Turkey, close your borders. Look at the Syrian refugees, close your borders. And then last week, look at the Syrian refugees, open your borders.
Yes.
It's not the same borders, but we are giving them messages and counter messages and being angry. I mean, exactly what's happening with Greece. We spoke about it 2 weeks ago. I mean, this poor, or maybe the poorest EU country now with all its difficulties, and we're asking them to do all the job and to close the borders, close the islands. I mean, already geographically, it's a nightmare. And then we are putting all the pressure on Greece. But to continue on Merkel, I don't agree with my neighbor about the catastrophe. I think she knows what she's doing. She's having 100,000 or 200,000 young, educated people who are willing to work and willing to succeed and willing to they're not, contrary to what the extreme right says, they're not here to benefit from social aid, things like that. They're here to get a better future for their children. They're here to escape the war. They went through, I mean, when you look what they went through, the sea, the walking, etc. And when you look at our unemployed people who don't want to get a job that is 20 kilometers away or something like that. So you know how dynamic and how healthy, let's say, these people are.
I think that's true. And there's no doubt that demographically Germany is in need of that influence.
Of course, it's an aging society also.
And as you say there, by and large, many of the people who are coming in are educated. But the problem for Angela Merkel is perception. And the perception in Germany is growing that this is something that Germany cannot easily digest, at least not in the immediate term. But that's what I think is working against her. There's almost a feeling of panic beginning to set in at the moment. After the goodwill that was shown last summer, the honeymoon is over, and now after the events in Cologne, the panic is deepening and the public mood is swinging against Merkel. I completely agree with you about the schizophrenia on that border, though, between Turkey and Syria. It's extraordinary. On the one hand, the European Union secretly wants the refugees to stay on the Syrian side of the border, but
they can't say it this way.
They can't say it. So, you have Federica Mogherini, the EU foreign policy chief, saying there's a moral weight bearing on Turkey. They have to let them cross the border. But she knows perfectly well that every single European head of state wants them to stay the other side of the border.
And it's not 200,000. I agree with what you say about Merkel. I just think the numbers are so overwhelming. It could be 2 million by the end of this next year.
Well, I think that's the thing. I think there is this sort of feeling of just limitless misery.
Of it being out of control.
And there's only
out of control with no real end in sight.
And there's only a few countries in Europe doing something. Sweden, Greece, Germany, Italy. France, the others have just backed off, so a few countries cannot handle this. Europe has to do it together. And yes, Merkel is courageous and brave, but she can't do it alone.
Although the other side of that argument, of course, is that Turkey has taken 2.5 million already. Lebanon has taken close to 2 million. And Lebanon, a map I saw this week, showed the tiny county of Cornwall in UK is the same size as Cornwall, and it's taken 2 million refugees almost.
Yeah, it's like 30% of its population. Imagine what it would be.
Another precinct heard from is France on this. Laurent Fabius, who handed over the reins this Friday as foreign minister to the former prime minister, Jean-Marc Ayrault, will have shut a 3-decade career on the government benches that included a stint as prime minister way back in the 1980s, with a parting shot for the Americans for, in his view, not raising their game in Syria, and also for Assad's Russian and Iranian backers.
The last reports from the UN show that Bashar al-Assad had tens of thousands of people tortured and assassinated in prison. On top of these brutalities, we have to recognize that certain nations, namely Russia and Iran, have been complicit and must be named as such.
Now, here's the thing. Is that a brave statement of somebody telling it like it is? Or, and journalists know this well, right? You're posted to somewhere where the regime is a little bit unfathomably. You play ball, and then when you leave, you write the report that's scathing about the regime.
I got to say, I think Fabius has been pretty great on Syria for a while. He really was openly angry with Obama over Syria from 2013 when
over
Obama...
the chemical weapons,
Right, Obama put the brakes on, said the chemical weapons was a red line. The French fighter jets were fueled up, ready to go, and he hit the brakes at the last minute. And Fabius did not hold back. And if I recall correctly, it was months afterwards, he was on a visit to Washington and again told Obama what he thought of it. So, I've been very impressed, actually. You don't often hear that kind of bluntness towards the Americans.
I agree. I think France is really losing a strong, powerful and useful voice in foreign policy, and we'll really miss him, I think. Jean-Marc Ayrault is a former prime minister, but he doesn't have anything like the weight in international politics that Fabius has. You remember the role of France in the negotiations with Iran. That was largely Fabius again. A really solid politician with a big background in foreign policy and diplomacy, who I think will be sorely missed. I think France will slip on the international stage as a consequence of this.
Will slip on the international stage, Eleanor Beardsley?
I don't know about that, but I think it's true that, the key moment when all of this changed and Russia saw that the U.S. would never get involved in Syria was when, 2013, Obama drew the red line and then said, okay, and didn't do anything for the chemical attacks. And that's when the Russians saw they could come in, things changed. Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying about Fabius. Slip on the world stage. Well, when I saw that Ayrault is not quite the same, is it? Fabius was somebody big, and
let's talk about the weight.
I agree, of course, with everything said about Fabius, but with a little
caveat,
little reserve that It's also Hollande's policy. I mean, Hollande has been very clear on Syria since day one, since 2012. I think he's really sincere. I think he cannot move a lot alone. You know, he must have EU or US with him, and they're not willing. And okay, Fabius has been very much more. I mean, it's his job. But when you look at Hollande's statements, and even after the Paris attacks in November, he was still saying Assad cannot be part of a solution. Assad is the enemy of the Syrians, etc., etc.
And the other thing that should be said to do about Ayrault is that he's a German specialist.
Yeah, of course.
And the relationship
be much more
between
European,
Berlin and Paris is also very important to Hollande.
All right, let's talk about the new foreign minister. For the first time in the annals of the French Fifth Republic, a former prime minister returns under the same presidential mandate. Tables turned, with Jean-Marc Ayrault now serving under the man who was his interior minister, the current PM, Manuel Valls.
We need people who have experience, who have already held positions of some responsibility in our country. Laurent Fabius had been prime minister, Alain Juppé was prime minister too, as was Jean-Marc Ayrault. It's with great pleasure that I welcome Jean-Marc Ayrault back into the government.
Great pleasure. The two men reportedly did not get along so great in the past. Eleanor Beardsley, what will a fly on the wall discover at the next cabinet meeting?
Listen, François, I really don't know, but I have a hard time getting my mind around this remaniement, this cabinet reshuffle. I think it's completely senseless, boring, and I have a hard time making my editors understand. It's like the big shuffle, the reshuffle. What is the purpose? Why do they have to always do this? Okay.
Well, it's like the Parisien cover this morning said, Monsieur Bricolage.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything.
DIY.
Right, the president kind of tinkering around the edges, tightening the
hoping
screws,
to get
whatever.
a boost.
Meanwhile, like the fundamental issues of
it's faffing
double-digit
about.
unemployment and low growth and so on remain unchanged.
Well, Amar, you're a French citizen. Explain
Yes,
this to us.
yes.
Come on.
Explain this to me.
It would be very, very difficult. But I have to say, I agree with you. It looks useless, but it's not boring at all, because you have people who enter the government who've been tweeting for years, maybe, that I will never enter François Hollande government, never, ever. And then they are today ministers. So that's not boring. That's quite funny. I'm talking, of course, about the Greens, les Verts.
They're boarding the Titanic,
who are, in a way, they're also learning politics, because we've seen them all coming, young people with a lot of ideals, a lot of generous ideas, etc. And at the end of the day, they are.
Hollande has made climate change a big part of.
Yeah, they are into politics.
Well.
They are so anyone into politics is ready to change his ideas or his vest, as we say.
Eleanor Beardsley, you say they're boarding the Titanic, but François Hollande, are we underestimating him? The man understands that to get reelected, it's probably going to be either the socialists or the right against the far right in the second round of the presidential election next year.
No, it's true. And I think Hollande, I mean, personally, I've been impressed with him. When he was elected, I didn't really know what to think, but I've been very impressed, and it's absolutely right. But
yet he's at 9%.
Yes, he went down with his cabinet reshuffle. He just can't get a break. But no French president. The French elected president, they want them to change everything. What really needs to change is the French people. And so they dislike every president they have because he didn't make things right without them changing anything. So, I mean, it's very frustrating to watch.
So true.
And as you know, Rob, our newsroom can be a place where there are cultural quid pro quos. What was the mood like when the reshuffle hit yesterday?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, there wasn't really much of a mood swing, I don't think. People were not particularly impressed by the change. The only thing I got was that most people, a lot of us, particularly the people who I work around, are interested in foreign policy. And when we heard that Jean-Marc Ayrault was replacing Fabius, people were saying, "Oh no, this is not good for France." But I mean, the interesting thing I think about
the name that had been bantied about was the mother of Hollande's 4 children, the current environment minister, Ségolène Royal.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, it didn't happen. Just to pick up on something you were saying earlier, though, about the relationship between Ayrault and Valls, I think because it's foreign policy we're talking about here, really, the president really determines foreign policy in France rather than the prime minister. So I don't really think there's going to be much of a contradiction between the two of them.
It's the Aero as a foreign minister is a nightmare for our Arab reporters and press, because in Arabic, in slang Arabic, it's a very dirty word.
Oh dear.
You're kidding.
I can't say a lot, but it's something that we like.
Kids could be listening.
Something. So they'll be very embarrassed again. And I remember when he was prime minister, the French Republic, I mean the embassies, had to issue a statement to all Arab media saying, to avoid any embarrassment, you should call him Mr. Ayrault with an L and the T that you never pronounce in French, but so you avoid the problem.
That was an official statement.
It was an official statement, definitely.
Fascinating.
Now, for South Africa's president, the problem is not pronunciation. The week started with the country's top court considering whether Jacob Zuma will have to pay back all of the $21 million worth of renovations on his ranch, which he'd previously listed as security upgrades. And after chants of pay back the money that we heard on Tuesday, Thursday saw cries of Zuma must fall. His State of the Nation address met with nationwide protests over mismanagement, over an acute economic crisis, and a walkout by the dissident splinter party, former ANC youth wing leader Julius Malema. As we look at those images, Vivian Walt, you've got to wonder, because turn back the clock 365 days, people were saying 2015 is the year Zuma's going to go. Well, he's still here.
He's still there, and in theory, he has another 3 years to go. I mean, the really scary question is, how long can this economy hold together? You have official figures are 25% unemployment. Of course, the reality is much higher. You have a currency that's basically in free fall. It's dropped 30% in a year, less than a year. It's completely pummeled by the slowdown in China, by low commodities prices. Remember, the country rests on its mineral wealth.
We saw in neighboring Zimbabwe the economy drop completely out, and yet ZANU-PF had a winning machine, and they still have that winning machine. Does the ANC have the same winning machine?
It's called the liberation struggle. I mean, Zuma is a liberation hero. He was in the ANC, in the armed wing of the ANC for many years, and there is a generation that is deeply attached to that history. Of course, that's fading. I mean, it's 26 years since Mandela came out of jail, astonishingly. Actually, yesterday was the anniversary. And so you have more and more South Africans who never lived through that experience of apartheid and who want what people most places want. They want a solid future with some prospects. And the Party of Liberation has not been able to deliver that as a government.
So you're saying that Zuma is perhaps vulnerable in a way that Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe is not?
I think it's going to take a long time for there to be a really cohesive opposition that can vote the ANC out of office.
Despite everything that's happening at the moment, yeah.
It's too splintered. It's racially divided still. It has maybe a little bit more hope than Zimbabwe in the sense that it's a more democratic country, and it has a very strong democratic constitution.
But the state isn't anything like so repressive in South Africa as it is in Zimbabwe.
Not at all. You wouldn't have marches like this in Zimbabwe. And so I think that there is maybe a chance, but it's very hard to imagine an impeachment of Zuma, even though here's a president who was on trial for rape before he became president. I mean, extraordinary.
But that was quite a triumph for the judiciary, though. They've managed to get him to pay up for, well, not quite yet, but he's promised he will, for the excesses that were spent on his private house.
Stonewalling.
He's promised to pay for part of it.
Part of it, yeah.
Part of
We
that
don't know
mansion.
what that part is yet. Yeah.
Undeclared part of it, yeah.
And one final point on this, there was this, in his speech, this call for a ban on foreign land ownership.
Yeah. Which is actually not a bad idea, to limit foreign land ownership. I mean, it's clear that, and it always was predictable that once South Africa was free, you would have thousands of Europeans, swarming in, buying up, choice real estate, and you do. And there's an absolute critical land shortage that has never been sorted out because the country never went the road of land redistribution as Zimbabwe did, because Mandela was very strongly against it. He didn't want a racial war on his hands. And quarter century later, the country is still kind of trying to sort out how to untangle a mess that took 100 years to develop.
Robert Parsons, which way it's hard to tell, because it seems on the one hand to hinge on the commodities that South Africa exports, on the other hand, this delicate balance that Viv was describing. Which way is South Africa going to go?
Well, it is a really delicate balance. I mean, part of the problem is, say Zuma goes, I mean, Julius Malema is the man apparently in the wings at the moment. And is that going to be better than Zuma? I suspect not in the end. If there's a chance that South Africa might start shifting in the direction of Zimbabwe, it is if Malema gets into power. He is openly sympathetic towards Mugabe. I think that would be a tragedy for South Africa.
Could Julius Malema and come back to the ANC and be sometime down the line the next leader?
I think this is the big question that's facing the country, is the future of this party that has been so unimpeachable. It's been the moral, touchstone really for the world, if you think about it. I mean, the struggle against apartheid was a really global moral issue that defined, for a large part of people, defined a generation. And here you have a party that, as a government, has become utterly corrupt. It just depends whether South Africans are really at a point of being able to walk away from that and shake things up politically. And I don't think yet.
In a way, of course, it's not beautiful news, let's say, but in a way, it's. I remember 25 or 26 years ago, before Mandela came out of prison and was in charge, you used to hear in Europe, or people would tell you, if there is a change, if apartheid goes away, it will be a catastrophe. This country will be torn, will be massacres, etc., etc., etc. And I'm happy to see that 25 years later, this did not happen. And also, this is. I mean, this is a corruption case that is not even questionable in many African countries. You couldn't have this question to the head of state in many, of course, Arab countries also. So in a way, of course, Zuma is questionable or has made a mistake. But it's also nice to see that South Africa is a country like modern country, let's say, or this is possible.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Amar Abdrabba, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Eleanor Beardsley, Robert Parsons, Vivian Walt. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next.